It's an embarrassment for the Russians to be put in this way. There are also strategic targets within that area that might be part of what they're attempting to do. It's an area where they've only previously sent across irregular forces.
Hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers, backed up with tanks and armoured vehicles, have pushed Russian soldiers back into their own country after a cross-border attack into the Kursk region. A state of emergency has been declared in the area and thousands of civilians have been forced from their homes. We can speak to Catherine Philp, World Affairs Editor for The Times. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Callum.
So in terms of the latest then, just bring us up to date after what has happened here. Just clarify exactly what's going on.
Yeah, of course. So Ukrainian armed forces with armored vehicles, as you mentioned, the significance of those being that they're Western supplied vehicles, they crossed over into Kursk on Tuesday, and there's been quite heavy fighting going on since. The Russians have claimed to have pushed them back, but this is one of these claims that we should view with some skepticism, not least because of the fact that there are Russian military bloggers, kind of embedded bloggers with Russian forces there, who say that it's going on still. I've just spoken to someone who's on the Ukrainian side of the border, and they've even seen additional Ukrainian forces heading towards the border. So I think what is going on in Kursk is very much still underway.
So a moving situation. It does indicate something of an offensive from Ukraine. And I noted one analysis that said in less than 48 hours, Ukraine seems to have captured more territory than during that entire ill-fated summer 2023 counteroffensive.
Well, that counteroffensive was on the front line within Ukraine. And so you were up against these very entrenched Russian positions, these very complicated defenses of trenches, mounds of earth that have been created there, and these dragon's teeth defenses that were put there. This is an area where, yes, there have been troops facing off at each other across the border between Ukraine and Russia, but it's not been an active front since the early days of the invasion when Russian troops came over there. So essentially, I mean, there's lots of reasons why this may have happened, but it is absolutely a diversion by the Ukrainians that they have gone into a very a much more lightly defended part of the battlefield overall, of the theatre, and not a place where they were facing off on a front line previously.
And I suppose, you know, in more ways than one, that is a strategic decision to prove a point. This has got to be a morale boost if it emerges that they can point to it and say, look, we pushed the Russians out, we've reclaimed territory. That is something that can be used as a kind of morale boost to keep momentum.
Yeah, just to clarify, they haven't actually reclaimed any territory,
Sure,
and I
okay.
think it's critical to what's happened. They've crossed the border and they've gone into Russia. Now, this is audacious. It's not entirely clear what the battlefield purpose of it might be, because Ukraine at the moment is being very heavily pressurized by a Russian offensive in the central Donbass, and they've been in retreat there. This looks like it could be a strategic move, certainly to distract Russian troops. It is, of course, we must remember back to the early days of the invasion, that this is a reflection of the creativity of the Ukrainian military and how important psychological operations are to them. So it's an embarrassment for the Russians to be put in this way. There are also strategic targets within that area that might be part of what they're attempting to do. It's an area where they've only previously sent across irregular forces. So Russian forces who've come across to fight for Ukraine have been across there before. It's the first time we've seen Ukrainian regulars go across. And the area where they've gone for, which is just north of Sumy, is an area where there is the last transit point of Russian gas into Europe. And they appear to be around that facility, if not in charge of it. So that, again, could be another element of this operation. And I think the other one that is important to look at is it's very important for Ukraine to keep alive the sense on the world stage that it's still in this fight, that it's in this game, and it deserves support. And that is particularly important with the run-up, you know, now less than 100 days until the US election, that they need to make a splash and a show before that happens. They've only just got F-16 fighter jets from the US that they promised over a year ago. I don't think we're likely to see them take those over the border, over into Russian territory. But they have breached a supposed red line with Washington by taking over Western donated armored vehicles. So I think that Washington, that was not given advance notice of this happening, will be scrambling to see how exactly they respond to that.
So yeah, I've just literally just written that down, that Western machinery crossing the border into Russia, as you say, a red line. Could there be something of diplomatic pressure on Ukraine to get out of there?
Well, I don't see Ukraine staying there long term. I think this is probably a kind of hit and run mission that's far more likely to be a blow towards Russian morale than actually holding territory. If they could disrupt gas supplies, as part of it, so be it. I think that one of the so the Western case for not allowing Ukraine to use Western weaponry within Russia, within Russia's borders previously, is, oh, this will trigger World War III and Russia will launch nukes at Europe and it will be doomsday. And I think Ukraine is keen to prove that's not the case. And they have won that argument in several ways before. They've won the argument that they ought to be allowed to use longer range artillery on Russia, having essentially overcome that argument that it would be too much of a provocation and that the rest of NATO would suffer for it. So I suspect that Ukraine is trying to sort of prove a point here, as well as undermine Russian morale at a time when they've been feeling quite confident about the gains they're making in the Donbass.
And so with that in mind, to what extent should Putin be worried about this show of force?
Well, I think it could potentially it could put Ukraine in a stronger position with negotiations. I mean, I think it's an irritant to him. I don't think it's a sort of. I think it is much more. It's a tactic within a strategy that I think we're all still trying to make sense of, because it's not even 72 hours old. But this idea that Ukraine is not down and out and has still launched these surprises is something that that Ukraine is very keen for us all, including Washington and Moscow, to be aware of.
Absolutely. Catherine, thank you very much. It's always great to speak to you. Thank you for joining us. Catherine Filpter is the World Affairs editor for The Times, another essential person to read as these developments flow in to make sense of exactly what is going on. There's a video actually in The Times article on this. In the Kursk region, Kremlin says 300 Ukrainian troops fired indiscriminately at civilian buildings. Tom Ball reports from Kharkiv, and that is available for you in the World section of The Times online with your digital subscription. TheTimes.com. President Putin accusing Kyiv of launching a major provocation. He was speaking before a meeting of the Security Council in Moscow when he made those particular comments. So further responses probably to be expected.